Good morning. We are at Ayin Beis, Volume 3, at the top of page 1476. This is the closing pages of Ayin Beis, which we've already learned once, a few months ago. Then we went back to learning some related different parts of Chassidus that talk about similar ideas to help us understand these deep concepts of unity. Then we went back to the Maimer and Torah Ohr from the Alter Rebbe with its explanations, the Maimer of the Mittler Rebbe that explains and elaborates further, and back to Ayin Beis now, which is based on the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, as I mentioned, namely pages we're up to in the corresponding pages to where we are now is page 382 in the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, which we're going to get back to after we finish the next page and a half, the conclusion here. Okay, the theme is unity, divine unity. Keep in mind that there's a mitzvah. The mitzvah Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad is not just a statement, it's a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to unite everything under the rubric, so to speak, as part of the unity of God. The importance of that is because that essentially establishes the whole basis of our purpose of existence, that we don't have a separate agenda, the creation, that is, the human being. We are here to serve and to fulfill the purpose for which we were created, which was to bring the divine consciousness and awareness into existence. That essentially means unity. The opposite of unity is duality, is two different agendas. So the fact is, of 8 billion people on this planet, most people, and all of us really begin with taking care first. My needs come first. Some people believe in God and serve a God. Some don't, or claim they don't. Even those that do serve a God, still very difficult to say that our entire lives are completely dedicated to godliness. But in essence, the purpose of existence is that we should be completely dedicated, because that is our sole purpose of existence. Like he says in the Gemara, Ani nevresi l'shamash eskeni. I was created to serve my Creator. And there's even an expression, I was not created for any purpose other than serving the Creator. Or in the words of the Mishnah in the end of Pirkei Avot, end of chapter 6, that we say in the Ethics of the Fathers, Kol masha bara kadosh baruch hu ba'olamo lo bara ela l'chvodei. Everything that God created in this world, He created for His honor. So when Mashiach comes and the purpose of existence will be realized, what will it be? That all of existence is essentially an expression of divine energy, of divinity. And different words, that's called the mitzvah of yichud. So understanding how we unite an existence which seems separate from and even antithetical to godliness, especially when you talk about the animal soul. The animal soul's focus, as we learned at length, is about self. It's self-interest. And you want that to also love God, that even the animal selfish soul within us, driven by self-interest, should also be harnessed toward loving God, to become oil that feeds the wick, which is the divine soul, that absorbs, the wick absorbs this oil, and it channels it. It draws that oil to become, instead of serving itself, to be fuel for divine love, for divine light. That's a lot of work. That takes work. And we're in the middle of learning how we come to that understanding by understanding this yichud. The more we understand how existence is not really a separate entity, it only begins to appear as such to us because of the Tzimtzum, the more we can understand how to reveal the true nature of existence, which is ultimately unity. And it's not a surprise, therefore, that science, as it's continued to evolve, has come to that understanding that everything is united. There's that searching for the unified field theory, that everything in existence is an integrated whole. It's not fragmented, disjointed parts, but it's today a scientific fact, considered to be a given, that everything in existence is all part of one symbiotic synergy. And as such, it reflects this concept of unity that we're discussing here. So that's what we've been learning. And we've been learning, the last piece we learned was that in order for this to be accomplished, there has to first be an independent consciousness, because obviously from a point of view of God, all this is moot. Everything is one there. You don't need to accomplish anything. But God wanted to create an existence like ours and create a tzimtzum, a concealment, that we should not feel this unity, and we should work our way up. First, Yehuda Tata, relating to the divine that relates to us, then coming to a higher level of Yehuda Allah, the divine that's beyond us, like not just the artist that created art, but God is being beyond being an artist, and then understanding that both come together. He both contains this existence and defines it, means he's part of existence, at the same time he's completely removed from it. The yichud of these two levels, and that's where the Kel Deus Havaya, unity. But that's from God's perspective. Like we learned, like the teacher, even the seichel that he has that is going to teach his students is all part and one with the seichel that he has on his own. However, it's not discernible yet. Then comes stage 2 that you can discern it. But from the outset, God wanted, like he said, the ratzon that the divine will was that there should be two things, two tracks. Haratzon, there should be Levels of Ohr that's beyond existence, and there should be a divine revelation that relates to existence. And he explained in the paragraph we learned yesterday that we're talking here not just a divine that's beyond existence, but kan hakavana, also the Ohr-Ayin shebe'elamis. Even the Ohr and Gili that manifests in existence, there are also two levels. The level that in other words, because he wants to explain that we also can access. Because if you say there's only a level that's beyond existence and you can't access that within existence, then again, it remains somewhat inaccessible to us. So he's saying that in existence, there's also, in other words, when the student is hearing the idea from the teacher, within that is embedded in a concealed way, as it was the way that intelligence was encompassed about Atzmus Adayin. So there is in existence itself both levels, and he explained that with Ageres HaKedesh. The Ageres HaKedesh says Iyu v'garmu ichad, which means that the Ohr is one with the Keilim. The Ohr manifests within the container, like I explained. The divine energy. Think of that as the energy of the artist manifests within his instruments, the paintbrush, and his other instruments to create yesh ma'ayin. So it's an Ohr Pnimi that goes into Mislabish B'Keilim. That's already as it relates to existence. Like he said, as the yichud of Zah and Malchus. Malchus that relates to existence. And that's the whole purpose of the 10 spheres, the Ishtalshalus. They go stage by stage until the energy is tailored and customized to be able to enter into existence. But we also learned there's two levels in that itself. So again, the two levels. One is in Atzilus, the spheres for the purpose of Atzilus itself. So that you see within existence, you have an Ohr that relates to himself. And then there's how the spheres are preparing for the world of Biyah. Let's say the Biyah. So you see both levels, which is already going outside of Atzilus, the unity of Atzilus. And it's Yesh Leimer, that initially you had these two Amshachas. This is the Ratzon, the God's will. There should be both levels of Ohr. Now in Atzmus there are one, and you can't distinguish between them. But so the Chitzenius is like the Pnimius. But through the Tzimtzum, it separates and allows it to emerge, and therefore you have an existence like ours. And we now begin the process of climbing the ladder of first connecting to the divine that relates to us, then the divine that's beyond us, and then the divine that is both beyond and relates all in one. That's what we're leading to here. And that's where we stop on top of page 1476. Now, all this is an elaboration of what the Mittler Rebbe said on pages 381 and 382, even 383 to some extent, the top of 384 where we stop. So we can continue learning the Ayin Beis which elaborates on it, and then we're going to go back to the Mittler Rebbe, and we'll see what the continuing message is, the continuing narrative is. Are there any questions before I start learning inside and continue from where we left off? Any questions? Okay. Now, just to make it, before we continue, just to make things a little more, I guess, palatable and a little more applicable to our lives, the key thing to remember is this, on a practical level. You can either live a fragmented life where you have many different agendas and many different voices tugging at you, your work, your home, your personal life, and all the other so-called expectations and demands on us. As all we know we have many different things, many different interests. A person is never going to be wholesome and complete and happy unless they have something that connects it all. Because there's something about harmony and unity that is not just calming to the human spirit, but it's also a healthy way of living. Because you're not what's the word for it, compartmentalizing and allowing different energies to go different directions. It's like a laser beam where everything is focused toward a mission, toward a hub. So the concept of unity is not just a philosophical, theological concept, it's also a practical one. It's living a life of purpose, and the purpose drives everything that you do. So applying all that we're learning here is we're really coming to try to understand how we can live in a world that has so many different components and at the same time discover a deeper unifying force within it all. So on a practical level, it comes down to this. If your mission in life, and this is the mission, is to take your corner of the world and make it a home for the divine, that everything in your life, your personal life, your home, your work, your money, your accomplishments, your travels, your vacation, is all there to manifest and bring light into existence. So then no matter what you're doing is all permeated with that unifying mission. If a person does not have that, then you're going to have the different agendas, like I said, which creates a certain splintering and fragmented effect, which has to ultimately wear us down because human beings abhor fragmentation. We're always gravitating towards connecting things, not disconnecting. The very concept of love is connection, attachment. So the idea of unifying is not, as I said, not just a philosophical one, it's a very critical psychological one that's relevant to every aspect of our lives. And the deeper we can connect to that unity, the more healthier we will be and the more wholesome we will be. So just one short point of applying a bit what we're learning to our practical lives. With that, he's going to go now back to the Tzimtzum. Remember, it's when the teacher wants to convey the idea that even though that idea that he's going to convey is part of his own brilliant mind, but for the student point of view, he needs to channel it. There's no way that a brilliant, infinitely brilliant teacher is going to be able to communicate that to a student who's a beginner. So that we call it a tzimtzum. However, as you recall, he also called it a parsa. And as I explained, the difference, Tzimtzum and Parsa, is what he's going to discuss now. Now, we learned this already, but the Rebbe Rashab is adding now the Tzimtzum and Parsa, which is so generally speaking, Tzimtzum is reserved usually for the Tzimtzum Arishin, that the energy before the Tzimtzum is like pre-creation, pre-existence, and the energy after the Tzimtzum is what the beginning of creation. But there's another concealment, which we call a partition. So a tzimtzum can be something you don't need an outside foreign object to conceal. You can choose to refrain and hold back the flow that's coming out of you. Just like you see a good teacher speaks, but also knows when to be silent, and it's all measured. But a parsa means you're introducing another thing called a curtain, a partition. So it's one thing that the light gets diminished. Another is there's another entity called a curtain that further diffuses the light. So he's going to address that because it's part of the whole discussion, Tzimtzum Parsa, especially back in volume 2, where he spoke about the big question, can we in a post-Tzimtzum reality or a post-Parsa reality connect to a pre-Tzimtzum and pre-Parsa consciousness? That's the challenge. And the answer, of course, is yes. So he's going into distinguishing between Tzimtzum and Parsa. So we'll just learn that. I'm going to do it pretty quickly because we learned it already, and it's part of the discussion, but we want to get back to the main theme, which is the two levels of Yichud. So he says, V'yesh leimer, third line on page 1476, and the pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. V'yesh leimer da ikru ha'idei ha'parsa. That this that we spoke about, that's mavdil v'nechlak, that separates between the pnimius and chitzenius, between the way it's all encompassed within the source, both tracks. In the source, they're all encompassed as one. What separates them? The tzimtzum. So he says it's primarily through the parsa. That tzimtzum is ubishvila Atzilus. That the tzimtzum is in order to manifest Atzilus, to be able to take from an infinite light, and that's beyond structure, and turn it into a divine world called Atzilus, and it is a divine world. However, it's a world of structure. That's the tzimtzum. However, to create a yesh, which means an independent consciousness, that something should feel it's a separate entity. Atzilus, like we learned, is iyu v'chayu echad, iyu v'gamu echad. As much as their structure there, all the spheres completely are aware all the time that they're just instruments and channels of godly energy. They're divine attributes, essentially. In Bria, you already have that they have a separate identity, like an ego. Not a bad ego and not a selfish one, but there is something that exists that senses itself. And for that, that's where the parsa comes. The partition adds that. So it's one thing, just to give an example, a teacher is teaching an idea. So he diminishes the idea to be customized and commensurate to the student. He takes a very brilliant idea and he just gives you the highlights, let's say, or a few key points. But then there's another step. He brings an example. He brings an example from your world. He says, in order to understand this, let me give you an example. I'll give you an example from something from the physical world. You want to understand divine energy? Let's take an example from how the soul manifests in the body. This example is already like a curtain. It's not just that you diminished the flow of energy. That's tzimtzum. Parsa is now you're bringing another entity called a mashal, an example, and you're diffusing further the idea and putting it into garments, so an example that the student can understand. So he says that's b'shvil habriya. V'hainu, the letzei chisavas hayesh, in order to create the yesh, yesh means an entity that senses itself, not as an extension of its source, like Atzilus. So zeh inyan briya kaneda, that is the inyan of briya, hu idea parsa. For the yesh, you need to have a parsa. Tzimtzum suffices to separate the Ohr, that the Ohr that was once part of a much bigger Ohr has been separated. As we say now, it's an Ohr that relates to the student, but it's all within the Ohr. Parsa, the curtain, adds something that it shouldn't just be a separate entity, but it should be distant. In other words, should leave room for independent consciousness. So it's not just the energy separated. It's one thing the teacher separates from his deeper inner wisdom, from his more external expression of it. And another is that it actually manifests and gets closer and relates to the student or to the yesh. And that's the parsa. Yeah. Any questions? So now he says, V'hagam de b'teira Ohr. He asks a question now. He qualifies. And though in Teira Ohr, the Maimer da Pasach Eliyahu, Dibra Maskal Pasach Eliyahu, the Maimer in Teira Ohr, there he says, Mavur, there it's explained that Tzimtzum b'chinas sis almas yesrim b'chinas haparsa. There he says that Tzimtzum is more concealment than the parsa. Based on what we just learned, it seems the opposite. That Tzimtzum is a concealment and it separates, but it doesn't come. The parsa is what really creates a total concealment to the point that it can become a yesh. So how do you reconcile the two? So he says, "Hainu the Tzimtzum b'chinas silika er l'mayla." Why is the Tzimtzum deeper? Because the Tzimtzum is silica elamayla. The whole Ohr is removed, is concealed. Parsa, who shall Ohr mislab is about Parsa misalam by. Parsa, the Tzimtzum is like a total silence, a total concealment. The Parsa is the Ohr is there, like we see. A curtain does not completely conceal the light. It's like a curtain that the Ohr manifests in the curtain. It gets diminished, it gets concealed, but it's not in a state of complete removal. In other words, in Torah, the Tzimtzum seems to be far more qualitative concealment. Nevertheless, he's going to explain there's something in the Parsa that's deeper than the Tzimtzum. So on one hand, the Tzimtzum is deeper because it's a complete concealment of what was there before. And the Parsa is not. The Parsa is a mashal, like I said. A mashal is not a concealment. A mashal is just taking the idea and explaining it through another paradigm. So he says, no, Mekol Mokim, nevertheless, be'in a hefsek, achanam shachas ha'er. When you talk about the hefsek after the hamshachas ha'er, in other words, if you talk about purely the hamshachas ha'er, so the tzimtzum is a deeper concealment. And the parsa is not a complete concealment, it diffuses it and it conceals to some extent. But if you talk about the hamshacha after the parsa, the parsa is a hefsek, it's a much deeper leap. So the tzimtzum by itself is a stronger concealment, but the Ohr afterwards, like he's going to explain, is not as affected once it returns after the tzimtzum as the Ohr after the parsa. Even though the revelation that comes after the tzimtzum, the kav, that thin ray of light that comes after the tzimtzum, it's not literally the same level of quality of Ohr as it was before. It's still connected to. So yes, there was a complete pause and silence, but the Ohr that emerged afterwards is still connected. The Geya touches and Dovuk and Ein Sof. We know the Kav comes directly from the Ein Sof. Indeed, true, it's after a complete pause, where the Parsa is not a complete pause, but it's connected. Is Gilim in the Etzem. And then the day it's a Gili that's coming from the Etzem. It just came after a complete silence, a complete concealment. Parsa, through the Parsa, it's true, it's not a complete concealment, but what happens after the Parsa, Nasav Dola, Klal. So I'll explain it with an example in a moment. That creates a separation like it is, as if it's not like the first initial light. So let's think of it this way. Let's say the light of the sun, sunlight. It's a bright sunny day, and the sun is shining. And then for whatever reason, that sunlight is so powerful that without getting into how it happens, I'm not talking about through a curtain now. The light gets weaker. Maybe the sun is starting to set. As the sun set, in the middle of the day, it's a glaringly bright day. But as the day wears on, because the sun gets closer to setting, the light diminishes. Furthermore, the light can completely disappear by night. So even though there's a hefsek, like a siluk he calls it, but then when the light begins to shine again, it's not a different light. It's still the sunlight. It remains sunlight. There was a pause. There was a period where the sun stopped shining, and now it's starting to shine again. You need that pause because you need to leave room, like he said before, that Tzimtzum is in order to separate. There should be a separate Ohr. But the light that comes afterwards is the initial light that was there before. So the teacher may pause and be quiet to leave the student, to allow the student to rise. But then when he starts teaching, he's teaching the original idea. A parsa, on the other hand, it's true, the parsa does not ever create total concealment, because the parsa is like an example. However, the light that comes after the parsa, the curtain, the curtain actually diffuses the light, and it's not quite the same quality light like on the other side of the curtain. So even though the pause is a deeper one with a tzimtzum, but the light remains more or less like the original light. Not completely, but like he says. With the parsa, it's not complete concealment, but the light has become diffused. So you look at light that comes through a curtain, you'll see it's still light that's coming from the sun, but the curtain has altered the intensity of it. It can alter even its many of its properties. So that's what he says here. So the parsa nasav doli kila enamuhus erarishan klam. So there you have something that Tzimtzum has, the parsa doesn't have, and something the parsa has and the Tzimtzum doesn't have. Each one is necessary, but for creation of bria, the yesh of bria, you need that the light should not be on the same quality. Tzimtzum is enough to create Atzilus from higher than Atzilus, but you need the parsa to change the quality of the light in order for the yesh of bria to emerge. Umashum zehu be'erech li is b'chinas makal yesh. And due to this fact that the parsa, this partition, that creates, it should be be'erech liyos makal yesh, that the energy should now be commensurate to be called a source for the yes for creation. The Tzimtzum created a paradigm shift that no longer is that original light as it was with that full intensity, and there was a pause, a complete pause, but afterwards that light starts shining again. So it's not yet a makal yesh. It separated the light. That's why there was the pause. But to be a makal to the yesh, that requires the parsa. So that's what he adds now in the explanation. But now he's going to take us back to the two levels of ayin that he began discussing. Well, let me stop here if anybody has any questions on what we just learned, the difference between tzimtzum and parsa. Okay. So continuing on now, he says like this. V'nimtza Ayin Beis b'chinas ayin. Ayin Beis b'chinas v'gili. So from this we draw that there are two levels of ayin, two levels of v'gili. Echad, going back, the first level is b'chinas rotzana Atzmus, the desire of Atzmus. Lias gili mina etzem, the loyli is b'chinas makal yesh. So God wants there should be a gili mina etzem, that his etzem should express itself, but not yet commensurate to the yesh, makal yesh. Beis, the second level, lias gili ershia makal yesh. The second thing he wants from the outset is there should be a Ohr that will be a source and relate to the yesh. And the Rebbe Rashab adds now, yesh leimer, and so here we go. The Tzimtzum therefore separates between these two, but the parsa is what actually allows it to become a makal to the yesh. So the Tzimtzum is necessary to create the separation. Without that, it's all like one. And the parsa creates that it should relate to a yesh. There should actually be like a separate entity that's different, a different quality of light than it was before. But the Tzimtzum alone does not do that. The Tzimtzum just separates, but does not create a completely new type of Ohr. Yesh leimer, and one could say, Shezeu b'chinas harotzen lias b'chinas eiris. He's saying now that these two levels, he's saying these two reflect that one is the rotzen that there should be eiris. The God wants that should be energies. We know there's Eiris and Keilim. So the first is the rotzen to be Eiris. What's an Ohr? Ohr means a reflection of a source. For example, if the sun didn't have light, it would just be a body, even if it's a very powerful body of self-contained light or heat. But if it doesn't have Ohr Hashemesh, which means the ability to express itself, it would be like, think of a black hole, for example. So Ohr is the idea of expression. If a human being just had etzem hanefesh, and we didn't have the power to express ourselves, we would be self-contained entities. We couldn't communicate with each other. But the Eibishter wanted Ohr. He wanted expression. He wanted light. He wanted revelation. So that's the first Ratzon. He's comparing to the Ratzon Atzmus Gili. The Aseris. And Ohr is be'etzel ma'alim chinas hakelim v'ayim mashnis barleil b'dibur amasl roshi amatis aleph. He's referring us to a mimer earlier in, I believe it's in volume 1, yeah. So they say maybe it's Mimona, find a different mimer, but 1. What did he say there? She has Gimel Madreges Ba'er. There he discussed 3 levels in Ohr. There's the level of Ohr that's Etzem Ohr. There's the level of Etzem Ohr. There he talks that that's beyond. There's the Ohr that's higher than Keilim. And then there's the Ohr that goes into Keilim. But Ohr, by definition, is something that's higher than Keilim. That's why you need a Keli to ground it. And then he also refers, he says, that this is like the difference, but he said the Levels of Ohr within Atzilus and Atzilus for Biyah. So Atzilus is like the Ohr, not as it relates to Keilim so much, meaning Keilim on a lower level. I think that's what he means to say. Not sure what the hefresh is here. Maybe he means, okay, I'm not sure. That's the first Ratzon. And what's the second Ratzon? The second desire? Yeah. And the second is the Ratzon that the Gilei should be there to create the containers. That's a second desire, a second step. Or a second track, I should say, not step. It's not the right word here, because both steps come together to create the Keilim. So one is self-expression, light, and the other is that to create Keilim that would be able to absorb and define and structure the light. And that's probably the difference. Levels of Ohr of Atzilus is like the light, and Levels of Ohr of Atzilus, the Tzerich Biyah, that's in other words for the purpose of Biyah, of the Keilim of the next level. That's most likely what he meant. Kamoi, like we say in Eitz Chaim, he says, Misav Sha'ir Nasa Keilim. From the thickness, from the so-called thick particles within the Ohr come the Keilim. What do you see from that? That even though Ohr fundamentally is beyond containers, think of it like colorless liquid, colorless water in tinted glass. So the glass is the container. The water remains colorless. So it's fundamentally beyond shape of the containers. But then there's another level of the Ohr, that in the Ohr itself there are, we call it like particles, a certain thickness that allows it to create the container. So the Ohr relates to the container. When we learned it the first time, I gave the example from volume 1 in Ayin Beis. Think of a wick and a candle, a wick and a flame. There are certain wicks that are just not conducive to be a wick for a flame. For example, if you take a piece of metal, metal won't be conducive because the metal doesn't have anything that relates to the flame. The same thing with the flame. If the flame is too big, a major, let's say, torch, it won't be contained by the wick. So the Ohr needs to have some adjustment within it, and we call that the thickness of the Ohr that relates to the Keli, because the Ohr in its purest form would either consume the Keli, the container, or completely overwhelm it and consume it, or would not be able to be contained by it. So there's the concept that the Ohr itself has a thickness. That's already a second level. That's a Ratzon to have this, that the Ohr should create containers. So he's explaining these two levels. Yes, Gam Yesh Lemer. Another way to explain these two, we can also say that these two levels is the Sherish, Shezeu Sherish, B'chinas Almedis Kasme v'Almedis Galia. That the first Ratzon is the root for creating the concealed worlds, like the world of thought, the world of water. That comes from the Ohr that just express himself. So it's only to himself. Alma Dizgalia is like the world of land, like speech, that someone else can hear you speak. And that's the way the Ohr as it relates to Keilim. And he says, Shahari b'maimer de Pasuk Eliyahu, in the Maimer Pasuk Eliyahu, which we say every Friday, from Tikkun Zayar, Omer, Antu dafikas, you are, Antu, the Eibishter's dafikas, from you emerges. Lanhoge behein almen stimin, the loy is galin, but almen is galin. From you emerges light and energy to govern in those concealed worlds. That's almen stima, almen diskasia, concealed. The loy is galin, that are not revealed, and also to govern and the almen is galin, the revealed worlds. So here we have the two levels. So he says, v'yesh leimer, the almen stimin ub'chinas Ohr shalamayla ub'chinas hayesh. The hidden worlds comes from the Ohr that's higher than being a yesh, the first level that he spoke about, the first ratzon. Shegam Ohr zen esava rakshe. This Ohr also creates rakshe esava silei b'chinas mitzias. But this creation is one that doesn't have substance. It's concealed worlds. It's like water. Everything's concealed there. Ukiyadua moshel medogim shebiyam. Like the example from the fish in the sea, Shem uvloim biyam. They're complete b'mei hayam. They're completely absorbed, they're completely swallowed up and submerged in the waters of the sea. Which means utter unification and utter nullification. That's Almid Iskalis. So something exists, but the existence is completely bottled. V'nikra almen stimin, and they're called concealed worlds. That means they're not just concealed from us, they're fundamentally concealed and hidden, encompassed within Iskalus in the core essence. They have not exited, they're all within the core, and they have not become a separate entity. And then comes the second Ratzon, the second level. The Almen Dizgalian, the revealed worlds, now a separate entity has been created, like the creatures of land. They're not completely absorbed and completely submerged within their source. It's a separate entity. This is already the Ohr as it relates, that's in a state of Yitzia, of exiting, of like leaving, and revealing to serve as being a source for the Yesh. The two levels that he spoke about before. Ubeza madreges, and these both levels, Keilim at Tzimtzum, existed before the Tzimtzum of B'chinas Iskalus B'Atzmus. They were all encompassed within the core, as we learned. And then there was no distinction of levels. There was one unified energy, light, in the core of Ein Sof, and through the concealment and the partition, it became separated into two levels. The b'chinas Ayin shel bo b'chinas havdolu b'richuk min Atzmus, that the second level of the Ayin of the Yesh has come now in a separate, distant state from Atzmus to create the Yesh Nivra, to create the created Yesh. So think of speech. As long as the speech is encompassed within the speaker and he hasn't yet spoken, even though he could speak, and even though he will speak, and even though he's prepared to say certain things, but it's all within himself. Within himself, it's not yet separate. The Tzimtzum and the Parsa is what allows now the speech to exit from him, and another person, another entity can hear it. The same thing in the process of creation. So as it's encompassed, it doesn't yet relate to creating something. So you don't have, Hashem didn't say Yehi Ohr, Yehi Rakia, Teitzer Desha, all the Tansara Mamoris, you'd have the first level, but you wouldn't have the second level. So the first level wants the second level, and it's in there. The second level is there with the first level from the outset, but it's initially all encompassed as one. And then the Tzimtzum and the Parsa separate between the two. So we have here the dynamics of unity on all levels, how we see it and how God sees it. And now he's going to continue and say, since The Parsa does not conceal from the point of view of the Mashpia, from the Eibishter point of view, the teacher. Therefore, by him, it's all one. Not only is it one because it's encompassed as one, but the Parsa never does any concealing. Concealing is only for our benefit. The teacher never loses sight of his brilliance. The concealment is only for the student's purpose, which is the next section, which really is the last section of Ayin Beis, where he's going to conclude how both unities become one. But let me stop here now at the end of this paragraph, if anybody wants clarification to explain anything that we've learned here now. Okay. Is it also clear?
Where the almond system and almond is going to fit within the structure of the Hishtalshalus?
They are everywhere. Like many things, many levels are all relative. There are two general forms of energy. Sometimes it's Atzilus and Biyah, where Atzilus is called the hidden world and Biyah is the revealed. But sometimes Atzilus is the revealed compared to levels that are higher than it. So it doesn't have a stationary location. It's refers to it's like saying Mamala Kalam and a Sev of Kalam. Sev Kalam and Mamala Kalam are two forms of energy that flow through all of Ishtalshalus. And it's all relative what level you're talking about. So you'll find in many places, sometimes Almadiskasi would even be called, I don't think it's usually referred to before the Tzimtzum, but it's all going to be a higher level compared to lower levels. So wherever you are, there's the level of water, the level of land, in every level of Ishtalshalus. Okay?
And we're saying the shayrish for both of those in Yonim
They're
is
like two archetypes. They're two archetypes. Like in general, there are in Ishtalshalus, there are no stationary locations really. Everything is everywhere because it's all spiritual. It's not like physical structure where Israel is here and America is here and Africa is here and Asia is there. There and above, everything is there's spiritual levels, and therefore there is a lot of overlap in that sense. Okay.
Thank you for a good talk, Rabbi.
Thank you. I didn't finish. We have a few more minutes, so let me continue. Omnom, going to the next paragraph. Omnom, however, haparsa hamafsekes hirak legaba nevroim. This parsa that separates between these two levels is only from our perspective, only compared to the nevroim. Avalagaba Atzmus, but from the point of view of Atzmus, the core source, Atzmus, Ein Shum Hevdel v'Hefseklal. There is no difference and an interruption at all. But Yesh, and the the lower level, that becomes a source and relates to the Yesh, Ayin Beis, the second level of Ayin that we talked about. How do you b'chinas yichud ba'atzmus ein sof mamish k'may Ayin Aleph? From that perspective, it is united within Atzmus ein sof, just like the first Ayin. The first Ayin is just the revelation of the divine, Ohr. The second Ayin relates to existence that the Parsa separates between the two. But by the Eibishter, there's no separation. The Parsa does not have that effect. So therefore, level 2, what we call level 2, which is different than level 1, by the Eibishter, they're like one. Bim Kain, and based on that, Kol Masha Nesave Memenu, everything that was created from him, from God, Harihu Gam came b'chinas bitl v'yichud b'tachlis. It's also in a state. If the Ohr that relates to existence is one with the Ohr that's beyond existence, so then everything that's created from that energy is also in a state of bitl v'yichud b'tachlis in truth. Utter nullification and utter unification. which go hand in hand there, of course, because of the nullification. That's why it's united. It doesn't have any any ego or identity of its own. And this means shebechinas ha'ayin shalei yesh, the ayin of the yesh. That's the energy that goes into the yesh that creates. Yesh and isava, and the yesh, the product that's created through this energy of the producer. Hariyem kamoi b'Atzilus. They are, even though they have entered into biyah, they're like they are in Atzilus. Sha'eru b'chinas yichud, that the Ohr is in a state of united state, unified state. V'gam Keilim iu v'gamu echad heim b'chinas yichud b'tachlis. Also, the Keilim are also utterly united. Ukamaimer, like we learned before, iu v'chayu echad v'iu v'gamu echad. You are one with your energies and you're one with your containers. What he learned before was that is the Tzimtzum and the Parsa that separate them. That's what we learned on the previous page. But from the point of view of Atzmus, the bittul of Biyah is like the bittul of Atzilus. Like he says right afterwards, Keinubam is gam b'biyah. So again, where there everything is one yichud, the yichud of iyu v'chayu echad, iyu v'gamu echad. He's telling us to look earlier where we learned that the Keilim in Atzilus are yichudei Allah, but from the perspective of Atzmus, this manifests and extends Keinu mamish gam b'biyah. That also in biyah is that way. So even though we say iyu v'chayu echad, iyu v'gamu echad only in Atzilus, that's from our perspective, but not from the perspective from above. And now he goes even further. It's not just a yichud with the divine, it's a yichud with the highest levels of the divine. And even higher. It's all encompassed, all united, even at a higher level. Shakelim d'Atzilus, begam elim is the biyah, the containers of Atzilus. And also the worlds of biyah from the perspective of Atzmus, heim kamei ba'ashara b'keich lifnei Tzimtzum. From God's perspective, it's the way it's, the hashara b'keich is the way he allocated and envisioned. The expression of hashara b'keich lifnei Tzimtzum is talking about the shir ba'atzmei b'keich kol ma she'osed li is b'peil. That there's a state where God envisions existence. That means shir atzmei b'keich. That's not, if existence doesn't exist yet. But from the point of view of Atzmus, existence is exactly as it is, the way he envisions existence. So we're taking it all the way back to Lifnei Tzimtzum. Hari yesham sheresh hakelim ba'elamis. Since he's envisioning it, so therefore you have to say there's a source for the containers and for the worlds. And yet it's only the way God envisions it. So what he sees is what he's envisioning. So too, in Abiyah, Atzilus B'ri Yitzir Aseh, after the Tzimtzum, once it exists, from God's perspective, what actually has actually created is all exactly as it was the way he envisioned it in his mind, without any mitzias of it at all. It's an utter state of unity. So what he's saying is like this, that from our perspective, obviously, there's a tzimtzum and there's a parsa and there's a creation of a separate entity, and that separate entity now has to work on reconnecting. But from God's perspective, existence from the top down, he sees existence from the inside out. Existence is simply what he envisions. It's the vision within his mind that has become a creation. And it's yichud b'tachlis. And based on that, then Bria, the creation, next page, page 1477. With Inyan habriya hu b'chinas is galus levad. So then Bria is actually not a creation, a new thing. It's just revealing what he's envisioning. The Bria hu loshen gilu u'kumay bora oisam. Bidi also comes from the word gili, to reveal. The kamoishu ba'atzmusei kenu bo b'izgalus. The way he envisioned it in his core, that's how it now came out in a revealed way. V'akol b'bchinas izgalus ba'atzmusei, and all this is the way it's encompassed in the core. Ke'ena shayach klal yitziv izgalus chutz la'atzmusei. Because here, from his perspective, you can't talk about something that exited, that's outside of Atzmus. It's like the dibur within his thought. It's all part of who he is, his internal being. So we said before Yitziv is Galus, we're talking about the Tzimtzum in order to create existence from our point of view, but not from God's point of view. And I was going to continue with the example he gave earlier to explain this. So we're going back now to the theme, how everything is all united from God's point of view. And all of this contemplation helps us understand that our lives, including our animal soul's life, is really simply all divine, all part of the divine picture, how God sees it, which we'll get to. But I'm going to stop here now, the third line on page 1477. And the next paragraph, the next section will be the end, where he's going to explain it with the mushal. And then we're going to finish what Ayin Beis says. And then we shall resume and continue the Mitler Rebbe, where he goes from here. So we'll be able to somewhat extrapolate and figure out where the Rebbe Rashab most likely would have gone would he have continued writing this hemshah. So we'll stop here, 3 lines from the top of page 1477. As I said, this is very heavy material, but I hope I did some justice to it. And any questions? Yeah. Okay.